Hello and welcome to the new episode of After Effects A to Z presented by MotionWorks. From Kuba HQ, I'm Kuba Michalski, and today we're gonna have a look at two distortion plugins bundled with After Effects, namely 25Bender and 25Bend-It. You may find these plugins inside of your Effects and Presets folder under Distort, here they are, Bend It and Bender, or much easier, you can simply type cc bend to reveal both of them in here. In general, I divide After Effects plugins into two categories. Some of them I used on almost every single project I work on, and the others I haven't touched ever. CC Bandit and Bender definitely belong to the latter category. I can't recall a single time I used them on any of my works, but after exploring them a little bit for this video, I found out that there are quite a few uses they can become helpful for. Let's have a look. Let's start with a slightly simpler of the two, which is CC Bender. Now, in my composition I create this little grid called Preview Checker, and that should help you see very clearly what the plugin does. So with this layer selected, let's apply Bender to it and have a look at the controls. We have 5 total controls, all of them keyframeable of course. 4 of them are values, and then we have 1 toggle. So first of all we have the amount, and that's going to of course control the amount of the effect applied. We have the style, and at the first glance the names may look a bit odd to you. Merlin, Boxer, that's not something you usually see, but very quickly I'm gonna show you that this is actually a pretty good naming, and it's quite intuitive to figure out which one to use once you know what they do. Then you have adjust to distance, and I'm gonna talk about it in just a moment, and top and bottom points. Now if we look at the composition, I'm not sure if you can see it clearly. Let's try to find this spot. Yeah, you have 2 control points. This one is the top one, and we have another one which is the base, and those control the area in which our effect is being applied. Okay, enough talking, let's have a look. So as I crank up the value to either positive or negative, you can see that we get a kind of swaying animation on our object. So that's the bend preset. Right now what I can control is where do I want to apply it. So if you imagine a straight line drawn between these 2 points, they are really difficult to see. Let me try to change them to perhaps red. Not helping much. Okay, I'm just gonna very quickly put a light gray background behind everything, and that should make it a bit easier to see. Yep. Okay, so where are our control points? Bender. There we are. If you imagine a straight line drawn between these 2 points, that would be the spline along which we deform the object. So as we crank up the amount, either to the positive or the negative value, this straight line deforms, taking the object with it. With the bend preset it does this swaying action. What other presets do we have? We have Merlin, which basically creates a bulge, and again you can move it to the left and to the right. We have Sharp, which does the same thing but with sharp angles. And we have Boxer, which does something like this. Now, it's not so easy to figure out what those things are named for unless we apply it to a slightly different layer. So let's turn off the preview checker for a moment and bring in a man figure. And I hope the contrast is high enough. Maybe I should switch off my light gray background. If you think of the actions that this figure would perform, those names are gonna start making sense. Now instead of applying it to the figure, I'm gonna apply it to an adjustment layer this time on top of my layer, and move the top point to the top of the composition and the base to where the little figure's feet are. So right now this does the bending. Pretty straightforward. Merlin would basically simulate sort of swaying of the hips, and for that we probably should switch to a female figure. Okay, so this is Merlin, and of course you can adjust if you don't want your head to get distorted. You can shift it up, maybe start from the knees height and end at the neck, and have that little cheesy animation going on. Let's move them back to the point. Then you have the sharp, which is, well, the only sharp preset in here, and that only makes sense to be called this way. And finally you have a boxer, and for boxer let's bring the man back in. And that's a kind of action as if a boxer would try to avoid being punched by ducking either to the left or to the right. And that's pretty much it. I mean, this plugin doesn't really do that much. Of course you have the adjust to distance option, and what it does, it basically adjusts the amount of distortion. When the setting is turned off, it just uses the absolute values, and when it's on, it's relative to the distance between these 2 points. So it's better observed when we have much shorter line. And let's switch it to bend. So with the adjust to distance, this is how it looks. When we turn it off, it becomes much stronger. So this is an absolute value of 116. Let's make it 100. And then this is adjusted to the relatively short length between the 2 points. Where can you use this plugin? Well, not that many uses unless you want to make some sort of cartoonish movement for your objects. The one really useful place where I found it to work would be animating trees. If you want to have the tree swaying in the wind, you simply apply the bender, move the top to the top of the footage, the bottom to somewhere towards the end, maybe not totally towards the end, and basically keyframe it slowly to sway left and right on the wind. Not much more, I'm afraid, could be done with this plugin. It's a very simple distortion one, but if you need this particular style of distortion, it's very useful and quick to apply. Let's have a look at the CC Bandit now. So again, I'm gonna start by turning on my preview checker and applying the plugin onto that layer. What you can see immediately is something really weird happens. Whoops, I just moved it. Which is the layer gets trimmed, and this is my main beef with this plugin. It does that. It has to do it in order to accommodate for the distortion it creates, but it's pretty hard to get the results you may want, and the controls are quite counterintuitive. If I start bending it, you will see another thing happen, which is the plugin only gets applied within the size of the original layer. So first thing to know about it, it doesn't make much sense to make it on the layer. It's always best to place it on the adjustment layer on top. So let's delete the plugin from here, create a new adjustment layer on top and apply it there. And that should make it much easier to see. So again, we have almost identical set of controls. We have bend, which is the equivalent of amount from the previous plugin. We have start and end, and those are the equivalent of the top and floor. And then we have render pre-start. Pre-start? That's a really strange name. Well, it's more like a style. And distort. Okay, let's start with some of the simplest settings, which are, of course, the amount. The more you crank it up, the more it turns, and you can go all the way to 250, creating something very similar to what polar coordinates does, basically turning your rectangular object into a circle. You can also create some sort of Pac-Man animations. Distort at the bottom basically changes between distorting only between these 2 points and extending it. So that helps us eliminate some of the crop that occurs. If you look at it, with the legal, or actually legal bounds, the object is going to get cropped at wherever our end point is. With the legal switched into extended, we're gonna see the entire object, and we can bend it like that. Naming on this one is just insane. It takes a while getting used to. And then of course you have the beautifully named render pre-start, which basically decides on the style of the animation. So if you set it to none, that's basically the opposite of the distort option. So it's kind of a cropper for the animation. Let's switch back to extended in here. Static is only going to bend from the start point upwards, so it does not affect the bottom of the layer. We can keep it straight and then only bend the top of it. So if you want to do a Christmas candy cane, for example, very quick way to do that. Bend is what we've seen before. It bends both of the parts equally, so from the start point it goes towards the end and then in the opposite direction. And then mirror, where is it? Mirror, which in here with this layer won't seem to do much, but basically what it does is it renders the top part and then copies it and duplicates it at the bottom. So if you're using something like a text layer, it's going to show the text in the mirror view on the opposite side. Let's have a look at some real-life examples. So let's turn off the preview checker and turn on the brand X. And this is probably the most common use for this plugin, which is well, kind of cheesy animation for the boxes products if you want to give some life to them. And again, you can see that this cropping of the layer can be really annoying. I have to move my endpoint all the way up there just in order to see the whole object. And once I do that, I can have my brand X washing powder or cereal dance a little bit, and you've probably seen it in millions of commercials, usually done with the bend deformer in 3D software. Now there is another thing that's kind of annoying, and I couldn't figure out if that was a glitch. I mean, I have OpenGL switched off right now, so it's just a problem with the plugin. If you look at the bottom edge, it creates this really nasty tearing in here. And the way to avoid it is basically to move the start point further away from the edge of the object or into the object, but then we start getting the cropping. And I think this is a good moment. You can see that tearing actually tends to occur even when we're inside of the object, so some pretty bad coding on this one. In here we can easily see the difference between the bend deformer, which basically deforms the entire object, and the mirror, which creates a copy going down here. And again, static will just move the top to the left and to the right. Do I have anything else in here? Well, I have a man figure that we could distort, but the results are pretty obvious. Let's have a look at some other applications. So probably the most useful thing you can do with this is creating rainbows. So what I did in here is I have an image imported from Photoshop, which is just a spectrum gradient with a bit of a blur applied on top of it, and then I apply Bandit to create a rainbow. And with Bandit, a thing to remember is that you're not limited to this line between the start and end point being vertical. Now in this situation actually, my end point is at the side of the image and my start point is right in the middle, and basically that allows me to bend this band from straight into the rainbow arc. What else can we do? We can do some simple text animations. So what I'm doing in here is quite similar to the previous one. I have the bandit with the end on the side and the start in the center, and then I have a simple loop animation of the distortion going up and down, and I'm using the static render, which means I'm only affecting one side of it, and then I apply a copy of it, link it up, and reverse the order, so this way I can sway them in the sides. Now again, this cropping that I told you about can become a nuisance if I just switch the animation in here, and of course that kills my expression. Let's switch it off. I could go only up to 30 degrees, because as I go higher you can see what happens. The cropping just starts chewing away at the text, and this is the cropping from the second instance. If I keep just one instance, I can go up to, let's say, 180 degrees of the rotation, and then I start getting it cropped. Okay, boing, 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 boing. That's what it does. Now, I've been messing around with it a little bit to see if I could come up with anything interesting, and actually I did. Look at this. This is a pretty cool effect, and this is done actually using the Bandit plugin. And let me show you what it does. So basically I have a composition in which I used Venetian blinds at 45 degrees to create this red and white barber shop stripes and animated them moving from left to the right. And I then imported the layer in here. I had to move it off the center because I just couldn't figure out the points for the Bandit effect to place the circle smack in the center of the screen. And basically, as soon as I applied it, here's my start point, here's my end point, and here are my beautiful glitches that the plugin creates. As I started cranking it up, actually what I was trying to do is that Christmas candy cane, and I just decided to go a bit further. It closes down, and then, with control, you just need to adjust it until it matches perfectly. And then that linear animation inside of the Venetian blinds creates a pretty cool hypnotic effect. And you can take it further. I did, definitely. Here's a Bandit abstract composition, and I think that's what this plugin is really good for, creating this kind of abstract, strange visuals. And what's happening here is, again, if I open the patterns composition, I basically have 3 layers in add mode. 2 of them are shape layers. One has some rectangles traveling up. One has some rectangles traveling to the right side. And then you have the same stripes we had before, just recolored to green and black. Whoops, let's turn them back on. And you get pretty cool abstract visuals with that. Now, unfortunately for Bandit plugin, you can achieve exactly the same effect using polar coordinates, but in some occasions this plugin actually calculates just a bit faster than the other one. So unless you need something specific that is there in polar coordinates, feel free to play with this one. So that's Bender and Bandit. 2 very simple distortion plugins. You can play with them, use them at very specific tasks, or experiment and try to figure out new uses for them. If you'd like to follow some of the more advanced tutorials that I do on After Effects, feel free to visit my website at kubahq.com. In there you can find a lot of presets, tutorials and other goodies, as well as a portfolio of my work, webcomic, articles and a whole bunch of stuff. Basically I post anything I come up with onto that site. And if you're just interested in learning After Effects, just go to my Vimeo channel, vimeo.com/channels/kubahq, and in there you can find pretty much the same content but just filtered to show only the tutorials. So, well, thank you very much for MotionWorks. I'm Kuba Michalski and I'll see you next time.